Good morning. I think my job is slightly easier. Mr. Rabidat has already set the context of how the digital transformations lead to failure. What I will do, I'll zoom in on HR and HR tech transformation and talk about in slightly more detail what are the key initiatives that HR is taking, as in 2024? Because the role of HR has been dramatically changing over the years. So what is it that they're now focusing on? I'll speak about what is the digital HR landscape look like. So typically, what is it that we call it digital HR landscape? I'll talk about what is the typical expectation from an HR and HR tech transformation, and then what is it, where it fails. So there are definitely point of failures, but where it fails. And then what could be the typical guidelines specifically to HR and HR tech transformation, and where does Stepping Cloud Consulting help you bridge these gaps? We basically specialize in HR and HR tech transformation for many, many years. We partner with organizations. I think it was talked about SAP, so we partner with SAP SuccessFactors, Qualtrics, which is in the employee experience space, and host of all other solutions. I'll talk about it in slightly detailed fashion. First of all, when we say the HR's role today, and this comes from one of the key studies where these are some of the key trends today that HR is dealing with, right? One is, obviously, at top of mind for a lot of HR folks is how to make their organizations skill-based, or as some of them would call as war for skills. So how do you curate skills? How do you kind of ensure that those skills are built, developed within the organization? Not just for today, but also for future. So there's also this whole strategic workforce planning angle, which earlier used to be more in terms of roles, jobs, positions, but the paradigm is changing. Now people are talking in terms of debundled skills and whether you have those skills or not, because the nature of job itself is changing a lot. So that's a second key aspect which HR is focused on. Third, and I think elephant in the room, which is AI. And everybody is obviously trying to catch on, but the question is how to do it with purpose. And that's where, again, the agenda is, and there are a host of use cases in HR itself, whether it is in machine learning-based recommendations, whether it is in the domain of conversational AI with chatbots, or whether it is in the generative AI with helping you write your feedback for an employee and helping you write a job description. There are a host of such use cases, but how do you make it with purpose is the third key aspect. Fourth, once we have come out of COVID, still the hybrid exists. People have seen the pro and con of it. But how does the hybrid or flex work environment really works? How do you bring in oversight, monitoring, but still help people work? That's another key initiative things. Well-being is another top of the agenda for all key executives globally. Bringing in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, also nationalization, because that's another key aspect in many organizations, Saudization, Emiratization, Omanization, along with DEIB is another key aspect. How do you manage that complexity? And lastly, how do you prepare your leadership, which is from today's aspect and tomorrow? Now, these are the key agenda items for HR. If you look at the board's expectation from HR today, right? And this is what is the typical landscape. This is a very busy slide. It's from Josh Bersin, who is considered to be one of the key authorities on HR tech. He describes this as the typical sort of a chart for digital HR landscape. This can have a basic elements like an HRIS, a payroll system, which is mostly transactional systems, but it also has your whole sourcing, recruitment, learning, managing careers, managing goals and performance, managing your well-being, rewards, bringing in, I think we were just talking about finding champions in an organization. Now, is there a scientific way of finding champions? So there's a technology now called ONA, or Organizational Network Analysis, which helps you find out the influencers in an organization. So there is another, that also comes within the scope of digital HR. You have to cater to all kind of workforce. The workforce is white collar, it could be hourly, it could be leadership, it could be candidates, it could be contractors. And there are multiple types of contractors, as in when we are talking about today. It's not just one type of contractor. You have fixed term, you have people who are working with a third party. So there are all kinds of, you have rig workers. You have alumni that needs to be managed, which is, again, a very important aspect. And you have host of productivity solution from Zoom to Teams to Slack to Workplace. And obviously, you have a very, very comprehensive HR structure. HR itself is not a monolith. You have a center of excellence, you have shared services, you have HR business partner. So it's a very, very comprehensive and complex structure. And the landscape needs to really fit it in. And then you bring everything into a data lake, which becomes basically a way for us to kind of analyze or take data which has been on multiple platforms. However, when you have to adopt to something like this, and you look at the HR transformation, the typical expectation when we embark on a HR transformation journey, that it moves from an inefficient current state to a more efficient state. It moves from a fragmented region-wise architecture to a more global sort of an architecture. It moves from a manual work to a more standardized work, more streamlined, more holistic in its scope, and more robust. That's a typical expectation. But you embark on this journey. I think we talked about millions of dollars being spent on these initiatives. When you go back to the organizations, maybe 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line, you find a host of issues. And many of you in the room would be able to relate to it. This comes purely from our experience of implementing, understanding, analyzing these kind of implementations. You will find fundamental issues. So people will talk about, one of the key promise is that you will have a single source of truth, often systems like these. People would say that this data is not reliable. They have implemented a very costly software. They will say master data is not consistent. Position data is not consistent. They'll talk about the candidate experience, recruiter experience is not working. They will talk about things like learning and development is basically just a system of records. It is not a system of engagement, which is a typical promise of such a transformation. Or, for example, the very basic thing like payroll is dealing with consistent errors because the inputs, whether it is from a variable pay, from incentive, from the time devices, is not coming correctly. Any change is taking much longer. Any enhancement is taking much longer. Adoption is very, very poor. People say, and somebody told me in the room, we are just going to this system for applying a leave. We are not necessarily engaging with it, getting anything out of it, right? So reality is, and obviously, while we talk of AI, intelligent enterprise, people are not able to make even basic management presentations out of these systems. Now, are the systems to be blamed for this, or there is something else? Now, when we analyze, we understand the issues are very, very fundamental. These are the 6 key things that we have found from our experience. And why these transformations fail, many times, the fundamental things that processes are not documented. They are people's head. I have a regional team based out in, say, Western Europe, but they kept a process which is not known to the implementation team. Secondly, whatever is the status quo, I'm trying to digitize it. And I think the point was mentioned, how do I convert a pen into paper into an automation? So I'm trying to take the status quo and essentially try and create an inefficient automation. That's the whole duplication of existing process. Many of the folks actually thrive in complicating a workflow. So they would say, if X band, Y location, C sort of a workflow, and maybe it is unwarranted at times. So there is no attempt to minimize the complexity, and a lot of times people thrive. Very limited understanding of governance model. Who would do what? It's not thought through. You start running, and then you figure out who should be doing what. So that's another critical aspect. Testing and inadequate testing. And lastly, inability to make decisions on time, which is basically linked to the regularity of your steering committees. When the project starts with this executive ownership, everybody is involved. They set guidelines, but as you walk into the project, it is handed over to the operations, and you do not find that there's a regularity, there is oversight, there is active decision-making. which kind of cause a lot of these issues. Quickly talking about how do we look at some guiding principles for implementation. Basically, the idea is that how do you minimize variation, keep variations which are legal in nature, are required from a compliance point of view, or have a very specific business reason to do this. It is a collaborative work, so whether it is regional teams, cross-functional teams, bring all of them together. The governance has to be robust and, more importantly, regular. From my experience, any project which has a steering committee happening 90% on time goes live with maximum 5 to 10% time delay. Any project which has lesser frequency of steering committees is likely to get delayed. Now, the last aspect, Big Bang is it's not an issue. The more important thing, this is evolving. This is the beginning. So people think that, okay, on the day one of everything will be done. A goal management solution. Do you get to the last stage of line of sight in year one? You can't. So you can't really set an expectation on that you're going to achieve. So you need to have very clear goals at what we're going to achieve in year one, year two, year three, or quarter one, quarter two, quarter three. Lastly, the end user should be in the mind. Many times, these systems are built by the operational team, or for example, HR in the room. But HR is not the ultimate user of the tool. The whole objective is to bring in employees, managers on the platform. But their point of view, their construct is not taken. So that's another key element that we look at. Holistically, there is work that needs to happen before we start. So many times what happens, a lot of time is spent on figuring out whether SuccessFactors is better, whether Workday is better, whether Oracle Fusion is better, where X is better, Y is better, based on a functional checklist. Reality is that between these solutions, the differences are very minor. So rather than spending time on that, a better time spent would be to know whether I have a competency model in place. Do I have a skill architecture in place? Do I have an org structure which is aligned with? A lot of time is lost in evaluation on functional checklist rather than the building blocks which are required for implementation. That's step one. Secondly, when you do implementation, it's not just about configuration and configuration iteration. It's much more beyond that. Looking at the enablement, looking at the testing holistically, looking at continuous communication. And lastly, it is not the end of the world that you have gone live. When you go live, there is a transition to operational teams. There is a critical feedback process. There is a critical change which comes out of that feedback that needs to be brought in and implemented. There has to be, steering committees seize the moment the go live is announced. In fact, the steering committees have to happen with more vigor after you have gone live because that's the adoption cycle, where you're going. So that's the extended governance is needed. Enhancement has to be done as a roadmap. It cannot be a day-wise sort of a thing. It has to be a roadmap, and that's, again, is another thing. The documents which are created on day one of go live are never updated. So basically, the new joinees who are coming in have no idea what is happening. The systems have moved on. Documentations are not updated. Refreshments have not happened. And the permissions are not streamlined. Any auditor who comes and walks into your room would say that people have extra permissions. People who need permissions do not have permissions. So basically, this is how typically it has to be step-by-step done. And this is how we recommend it. Stepping Cloud has been doing this for quite a while. I come from a background where I've spent time with PeopleSoft, with SuccessFactors, Oracle, SAP, Kronos, everybody who is a big player in this space. And then I started my own in 2013. So basically, we bring a lot of domain capabilities in this space. We have done more than 60 global implementations of this nature. We have very, very strong diagnostic focus. So we help you figure out where the problem is and how do we kind of build a revamp approach on this. We have team presence across Middle East, India, Southeast Asia as well. We not just build something out of this, we have pre-built custom extensions, which helps you fill the gaps. Even though you are adopting cloud, the cloud needs to be filled using an extension, and that's what we are trying to do. We have more flexible approach to scope and scope changes, knowing that the scope changes will happen. There is obviously a certain level of information in the beginning, but when you adopt, there would be a scope change, and there needs to be a scope for that as well. More strong focus on analytics, integration, and obviously continuous change management. So these are some of the key elements. We are based here. We have a booth outside as well. So any of you want to know more about it, you need to discuss further, we'll be happy to connect and discuss. Thank you so much for your patient listening.